Before he left that morning, he was white as a ghost. That was my mom's tearful memory of her final moments with my dad. He died that afternoon in an armed forces plane crash, January 28th, 1953, less than 2 months before I was born. His plane was flying supplies from Vancouver to Puncie Lake. At least that's what the armed forces told my family. Madam Chair, fellow Toastmasters, welcome guests. When I was 5 years old, I promised my mom I'm going to find Dad's plane. It became my biggest moment, my biggest drive in my life. When I was 13 years old, I marched into the Armed Forces office in Vancouver, demanding to know information about my dad's plane. And you may ask, how did that work for you? Not well. From the time I was voting age, every year I would go to my member of parliament and ask if he could help to find some information about my dad and his plane. And every year my MP would say, Gene, I'll see what I can do. Nothing. I discovered the Canadian Virtual War Memorial website. This is a web page dedicated with pictures, stories, and information about our fallen soldiers. There was no information about my dad at all. I contacted one of the representatives, a fellow by the name of Kevin Vickers. Kevin said, Gene, I'm sorry, but we have no information about your dad. My dad died serving our country. He became a forgotten soldier. January 13th, 2006, my wife Heather and I drove out to Abbotsford to see my mom. And while we were there, my mom asked, I wonder if they ever found your dad's plane. Driving home that night, I said to Heather, Mom is 81 years old. Somehow I need to find some information about his plane. And Heather said, do you know what your problem is? You're always doing things for others, but you never ask for help. And I looked at her and I said, Heather, what do you mean by that? And she said, Gene, you were best man at Gaetan and Zoe's wedding. Gaetan is a retired colonel. I reached out to Gaetan, shared what little information I had about my dad, about his plane. The very next day, Gaetan came into my office. He closed my door, locked it. He walked over to my Venetian blinds. He closed them. The moment one, discovery, as Gaetan said, Gene, January 28th, 1953, a DC-3 crashed off the shores of Lascadi Island. He gave me the exact coordinates. On board that plane were the following 7 officers. He named them. The last one was George Hilbert Vickers, my dad. He said, Gene, I think I know why your dad was white as a ghost before he left that morning. He was probably fully aware of the fact that the pilot refused to fly the plane. The replacement pilot had never flown a DC-3 ever. He said, Gene, your dad and the crew weren't flying supplies from Vancouver to Puncie Lake. This was the Cold War. They were looking for Russian submarines in the Georgia Strait. Your dad and all those officers were heroes. They were fully aware of the imminent danger that they were facing. but they were there to serve our country just the same. And the good news, Gene, is this was highly classified for far too many years. It isn't anymore. Your dad's plane crashed because back then, at that time of the year, DC-3, the wings would often freeze. And that's exactly what happened. The wings froze in his plane and it crashed into the ocean. When I received all that information from Gate 10, I locked up my office and I went and picked Heather up and we charged out to Abbotsford to share all of this information with my mom. I don't think I ever saw her so charged up, so much alive. I called Kevin Vickers from the Canadian Virtual War Memorial Site and said, I've got some information for you. And it took him no time at all to get all that information loaded up to the site. The next morning, I put an obituary in the Vancouver Sun newspaper. I received a phone call from Chris Rose, the editor of the Vancouver Sun. He said, Gene, was it your intentions to put this in as an obituary? Or do you think perhaps a memorial might be a little more appropriate? I said, Chris, this information about my dad, it took us 53 years to find this information. And when we find it, it probably never hit the paper ever before. I'm quite happy with an obituary. And Chris said, Gene, that's what I wanted to hear. If it's okay with you, I'm going to grab a photographer and come out to your place and cover this amazing story. March 17th, the Vancouver Sun released a full 2-page spread about my dad's story. 4 days after my mom asked, I wonder if they ever found your dad's plane. I can't begin to share with you how vitally important it is sometimes to listen to your wife. Heather and I flew out. Oh, excuse me. The next day after the newspaper clipping was released, I got another phone call from Chris Rose, and he said, Gene, do me a favor. Call Jack Herman. He's a member of the Vancouver City Police. And Chris wouldn't say the reason why I was to call Jack, but he gave me his number. And when I called Jack, he was a wreck. Jack that day followed his normal tradition. He grabbed the Vancouver Sun newspaper, he hopped on the bus and headed off to work. And as he was heading off to work, he came across that 2-page spread. He saw the story about his dad. And for the first time in 53 years, Jack Herman found out the story about his dad. The next morning, I received a phone call from an elderly woman from Ottawa. And she said, Gene, you don't know me, but I love you. You have given me peace. Now I know what happened to my husband, and God bless you. Heather and I took the plane to Ottawa, and we visited the Parliament buildings, in specific, the museum. And when we got to the museum, there it was, the book, the memorial book, the moment, moment 2, no longer a forgotten soldier. When I approached that book, it was open at my dad's page. It was screaming at the world, saying, Gene's dad is a hero. He's not a forgotten soldier. When I got back to Vancouver, I immediately phoned Jack and shared all the information about the book. And then I asked Jack, I said, by the way, how's your mom? Jack said, Gene, she's passed away. I was devastated, brokenhearted. And I said, Jack, I am so sorry. Jack said, Gene, why? My mom is in a far better place now, and she is with my dad again. 4 years ago, my daughters chartered a boat, and we headed out to Lasqueti Island. When we got there, the waters were calm. It was a beautiful sunny day, gorgeous. And as I looked into those waters, right where my dad's plane had crashed, I said, Dad, I love you. The moment three, the greatest moment of my life. I could hear him clear as a bell saying, I am proud of you, son. I am 67 years old. I have just shared a very long personal story of my life, but I can hope you can take away two valuable lessons if you want something badly enough in this lifetime. One, don't ever give up. Two, listen to your wife. Don't be afraid to ask for help.